Guys, welcome back to the Share Parenting Podcast, where every mom deserves to feel sure of her parenting. I'm your host, Sammy Bell, creator of Share Parenting and author of Share Parenting Building Blocks to Create Their Best Childhood. Here on the podcast, we address the issues that make moms question themselves or their kids, and we discuss creative solutions that meet the needs of each unique mother and child. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Share Parenting Podcast. Today I am so excited. We have a very special guest. This is Kim Hawley, right? Or Hawley?
Hawley, you were right the first
Hawley,
time.
perfect. She is a holistic sleep coach and a lactation consultant and a peaceful parenting educator, and the host of the Responsive Family Sleep podcast. So she is here today to talk all about her special interests and help bust some of the most common sleep myths out there so that we can get back to focusing on developmental knowledge and sleep science and our own intuition to really attune to our babies and be responsive to their sleep needs and to make sure that everybody in the family is getting their needs met around sleep. So I am so excited to have you here. Can you go ahead and share a little bit about yourself and your journey and how you got here and why this is special to you?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. First of all, I'm super excited to be talking with you today. I like to say that I got into supporting families with sleep by accident, like truly and honestly. I, as many parents, did not really think much about sleep when my oldest was born. He's 11 now. And I was just like, oh, whatever. Like at the time I was working as a public health officer on a infant mortality reduction program. So I don't actually advise becoming a parent working on that kind of program. It's not the best place. Lots of wonderful, feisty, women working around, but not the most anxiety lowering topic to be working on. So I was like, oh, I know safe sleep. Like I kind of have to for my work, whatever. I don't need to worry about it. Babies wake, they feed, you put them down. Like, what is there to know? Like, a stupid first time parent. And I mean, I, in fairness, I also have a background in culture and anthropology. So I was like, around the world, people like manage to take care of their babies at night and it's not a big deal. So why would it be that big of a deal was kind of my thought process. I never really thought about how we cared for babies in this country because my mom was like, my parents were very responsive around us. So I was like, I mean, I shared with my mom till I was 3. And like we grew up hearing stories about how like my sister woke every 45 minutes in the first year because she had reflux, but they didn't diagnose it in the early 80s. And like, I slept through the night for the first time when I was 3. And my mom knows that because she had a stomach bug and I slept on the couch all night. And she only knew that because I didn't come find her when she was sick. Like, just like ridiculous things like that. So like, I was like, whatever, babies wake, no biggie. I'm not going to have a baby that sleeps through the night anyways because genetics. So, and then I had my baby and I was like, oh my God, like, okay, babies wake and you feed them and you care for them is great, but also what in the world is normal beyond that? Like that's not enough information.
Yeah.
And of course I'm usually like an information person, like, so it's kind of funny, just everyone else birth and, focus on the birth and spend all your energy on that and not really think beyond. So I was looking for information and not finding information that was, anything but sleep training. Mm-hmm. And I was among the first of my friends to have babies, and the ones that did were much more in the sleep training kind of camp. And I was like, but what's normal, right? Like, but what is normal, right? And like, just not finding that. And so I did finally, thanks to a lovely lactation consultant who had a nice conversation with me, pointed me in the right direction of some resources. And then I got really interested in it. Like, why? Why do we have this big gap between culture and like normal baby biology? Because that's the anthropologist in me. Yeah. And, I just kind of read that stuff as a parent. And then I quit my public health job because I was like, various reasons, but I was like, I don't want to be a stay-at-home mom, like nothing against that. Like I just knew I wanted to do something, but also be around my baby more.
Yeah.
And so I, started getting into like, how can I work with parents on these issues that I already like and that I liked in public health, but wasn't really able to work with them on. So eventually I stumbled on a certification that was all biologically normal sleep. And I was like, oh my God, people are teaching people to like do this.
That's amazing.
Support families like as a thing.
Yeah.
And so I took it and I fell in love and went from there.
Oh, that's so good. It's so good. It makes my heart so happy. I think that I have a very similar story where most people I knew, they sleep trained, and quite frankly, for their families, it often didn't feel like a very big deal. And I did not have that baby.
Temperament matters. Temperament is everything.
That was not my child. And it was to the point that they like couldn't believe me. It was like, I'm like, okay, our doctor insisted we try. We tried one night and he didn't ever sleep, actually. He stayed up until it was from 7 p.m. until 4 a.m. He was still awake. I was falling asleep standing up.
Aww.
He was nowhere near sleep. And I was like, you win. And not in like a mean way. Like, no, I didn't think this was right for our family anyway. But confirmed my decision completely. And I felt bad. I don't remember exactly how old he was. I want to say it was around maybe like 9 months or so, something like that. And he had never slept very long. I think that usually when he was really little, he would sleep like 10 to 20 minute little windows. I remember celebrating when he finally hit 1 hour.
Oh, goodness.
Oh my gosh. It's been 1 whole hour. I had incredible postpartum depression and anxiety and couldn't sleep. I had this baby who had medically complex needs and cried 16 plus hours a day sometimes and never slept and couldn't sleep. It wasn't just that he didn't want to, like he literally couldn't. He was in pain. And it was just a really hard time. And you're right. Anytime I'd go online or talk to the doctor, it was like, well, just sleep train him. I mean, so much so he had a very hard time nursing. So with IBCLC,
I'm sure,
that side too. He had a really significant tongue tie. His tongue, when he cried, was stuck on the bottom of his mouth. He would cry and like you could see it straining. And I noticed this and I brought it to the doctor and the doctor was like, that's a bunch of made up stuff. And I'm like, okay, but I'm like bleeding from feeding him. And they're like, yeah, that's normal. Like I was so dismissed. And so we ended up switching doctors. And then the next doctor was mad at me for breastfeeding because he wasn't gaining weight. And by the next appointment, I had been pumping in addition to nursing at this point, it was like every 20 to 45 minutes I was nursing him. And I was trying to pump in between those. And I've never been a huge milk producer. That's just not how my body works. Probably also like the lack of sleep and incredible stress.
Yeah.
But, I would like, it was basically just constantly trying to feed this little person and he wasn't able to gain enough weight. And so, he was declared failure to thrive. And at that same appointment, that doctor asked how he slept. And I was like, we don't do that here. Like I kind of made a joke about it. And he was like, oh, that's ridiculous. He should be sleeping through the night. You need to just put him in a room, lock the door, and then not until the morning. And I just kind of looked at him like,
so negligent. That's so.
He just told me he's failure to thrive. What my understanding of that is he's not getting enough calories. And you're telling me to cut out half of his feeds instantly, like just overnight. And I was just, I couldn't wrap my head around it. He also was really anti-breastfeeding. He was like, well, what you should be doing is giving him formula, but you're too selfish to do that.
I mean, a baby with significant ties can have trouble bottle feeding.
Yeah.
It's not just about nursing.
It was wild. And I was asking, I was like, well, could we do like an SNS and like add to it, like while he's nursing and like help him get stronger muscles and bigger mouth and all of this. And he just had no patience for it.
Pediatricians need to know their scope, and their scope is not managing complex feeding situations. Like they are not trained for it, nor are they trained for sleep. So they need to just refer and keep their mouths shut unless they've taken extra training.
And I will say, I hope that by now they have. I know that, so I was in Las Vegas, Nevada, and this was in 2013. And so I believe it was 2014, they did a big ties training in the city for a lot of the pediatricians. So by the time I had my second child in 2015, things were already a little bit better.
Yeah. That is a while back. That is a while back. Your oldest is my oldest's age.
Yeah. And my sister had a baby in 2019 and she got a very different experience. You know, the doctor was like, oh yeah, definitely there's ties. And also I think there's buccal ties, and let's get these assessed, you know, by there's one dentist there who is really good at assessing like all the oral function. He's like a kind of a specialist in that. And all of the I can never get this acronym right. LBCLCs.
IBCLC. Yeah.
Refer to her.
I mean, I will say there's still a lot of pediatricians though that dismiss ties as a problem. So yeah. It's better, but it's not better. If that makes sense. Not
resolved. And it is interesting that you can just say like, oh, that's not a thing. But it absolutely can impact sleep. Yeah. So no wonder this little person couldn't sleep. He had a neck injury from his birth. He was born via C-section. And he was in a very cockeyed position inside. And so he had torticollis, and it was one doctor mentioned it. And then we tried to get him with that doctor and he was gone for months. So we mentioned it to the next doctor and she didn't know what that was. And we asked about going to a chiropractor, and she was like, if you want to give your baby a stroke, like she was super anti-chiropractic. And I was just a very scared, overwhelmed, new time mom. After my first son and everything we went through, I'm like, not listening to you, not listening to you. I'm going to go to the people that will actually listen to me, and we'll have a discussion. And I found phenomenal chiropractors who are so gentle and very helpful with little babies. You know, they're not snapping their neck. They're, you know.
No, that's not how pediatric, like infant chiropractors work. They do more soft tissue and very gentle. And a baby with ties inherently has a lot of tension, and a baby with torticollis inherently has a lot of tension. So you have two things right there create a lot of tension. Tension affects the nervous system, like tongue placement can affect airway development. Like we have so many layers. Pain inhibits sleep. Like there's so many layers. Not eating efficiently affects, like there's so many layers.
There's so many pieces of it. So that we had to correct airway even at 9. We had to do palate expansion to correct airway. So this is not a made up thing. There are real things happening in your baby's lives potentially. And
this is kind of like we have the continuum. I like to think we have a continuum, right, of babies where we have like easygoing babies that are going to be pretty decent sleepers no matter what you do as a parent. And I often think when parents get them as first babies, I think they're doing like everything
all right.
That the baby to be the sleeper that they are, and really like it's not them, it's that their baby sleeps really well. Not that they're doing anything wrong necessarily. Like they don't need to be very intentional because their babies inherently find sleep very easily. And there's like our average baby, which is most people's baby. And we can talk about what that norm is. Then there's like what I would call our frequent wakers. We're gonna talk about your oldest. That's a different sort of category. But our frequent wakers that are more about like high needs, temperaments, and things like that. But then we have our frequent wakers that actually have medical complexities, and they're different. You don't always know what you have right away, right? I mean, you kind of sort of did, sort of didn't. But like the reason they're different is because of just temperament, high needs baby, we're going to have sort of a different path and a different types of supports we need than a baby that like, we got to get to the root of some of these medical things if we're going to make life easier. And that's different, right? And sometimes they overlap, right?
Right. Well, and I do think that they do. I mean, he's always been a high needs human. Which, you know, it tracks. My husband would be an HSP, like a highly sensitive person. Things exactly so. But I do think my experience could have been a lot different if I had someone looking at the whole picture going, oh, well, you've got a lot of these medical things. Like, let's address those, and physiological things. Let's address those. And like, let's see where we land. And then where are you on the spectrum?
Yes, absolutely.
My second would be, I would think, more in the easy temperament. I was in shock. This child slept for 4 hours at a time, and he'd wake up and he'd eat and he'd go right back to sleep. And I didn't know what to do with myself. I felt so rested. I'm like, how is it I transfer from one baby to two babies and I'm getting more sleep? What is this life? I don't understand. And the fact that that's like a normal thing for some people, I'm just floored. Like,
I think it's like, in some ways, parents who had the really high needs, highly complicated first child with sleep, like you don't even fully process that until you even get more average baby, versus the families that the easier or more average baby is their first, and then they get the highly sensitive second baby, and they just like feel like they don't know what hit them. And like, it's almost harder than if that baby had been first, because the difference, it's not only like coping with the baby in front of them, but like difference between babies.
Right. And the comparison.
And how much they thought they had control over and were influencing that was really completely out of their control. That was really just their baby's temperament. That can be really hard just from like that mental mindset side of things to like cope with. And that, I mean, that matters, right? Like that matters.
It does, because you can't help but compare and go, okay, but your brother, he slept for 4 hours. Why are you waking up every 45 minutes? Stop doing that. And something has to be wrong, you know? So can we put numbers to this? What would like an average baby sleeper look like?
Yeah. So when you look at the big studies on like sleep in the first year or first 2 years, I love this study. I will totally, as always, forget the names, but I can send them to you if you want to like link the study later. I'm terrible with names. Like, it's just the thing with me. And they had like average wakes at different points across the first 2 years.
Okay.
And it was 2.2 wakes at 3 months, 2.5 wakes at 6 months, 1.8 wakes at 12 months, 1.1 at 18 months, 0.9 at 24 months. So basically, for most of the first year, we're in that 2 to 3 wakes as average.
Nice.
You know, a lot of times they'll say like 1 to 3 wakes and feeds, just because some of those babies sometimes are waking once, right? But like more often we're in that 2 to 3 is pretty average. You're going to bump up to 4 sometimes, and that's not even what I would consider a frequent waker, if we're just occasionally bumping up to 4 wakes, especially around periods of rapid development. Now, that doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean that it might not have a negative impact on your sleep, or you don't need to be strategic about how to support yourself, but that is pretty average.
Awesome.
And then we have our really easygoing babies, and then we have our frequent waking babies, right? Kind of on either side of that.
So I've heard that nobody actually sleeps through the night. Can you tell us a little bit, like help us with that one?
Yes. So when we talk about babies waking, what we're talking about is them waking up enough to need your support for something, right? Because all humans wake very briefly at the end of each sleep cycle, and we do a bit of a subconscious assessment, right? Am I safe, and do I have a need? And you as an adult, it kind of takes a lot for you to feel unsafe, right?
Yeah.
Assuming that you're in a safe place. And if you have a need, you do something about it, right? You like adjust the temperature, you get a drink of water, use the bathroom. If you are really stressed about something, you probably have some go-to stress management tools, right? You had a nightmare, you wake up actually feeling unsafe. You know, if you have a partner, you might snuggle up to them, or again, you might have some tools, listen to a podcast, whatever. Your baby or your toddler can't do any of those things, and they have all those same needs. So they wake up, they do that brief assessment. Again, this is subconscious, so you don't remember doing it in the morning. You're doing it whether you remember it or not. Like, this isn't something you're consciously remembering. Like, you might remember if you got up and had to pee and then took 20 minutes to go back to sleep, but like, you're not remembering all the times that you're doing this.
Right.
So babies, they get to the end of that sleep cycle and they do that same assessment, except that babies are meant to be close to us. We are carry mammals, and closeness is safety.
Yeah.
And separation is risky, like from a biological, like evolutionary standpoint.
Yeah, of course.
And so simply being separate from you for some babies is enough to like tip them into alarm. But also they could be hungry, they could be thirsty, they could be uncomfortable, they could have a wet diaper, they could be scared, they could need connection, right? All these different physical and emotional reasons.
Yeah.
And they can do absolutely nothing about except for signal to you that they need you. Versus if they get to the end of that sleep cycle and like they're feeling good, right? And then they're more likely to consolidate to the next sleep cycle, like to just keep sleeping. And then you get those longer chunks of sleep. And where that threshold is for like something being bothersome depends a lot on temperament and sensory profile, right? And that's where like temperament is one of the biggest, like, I don't know, it's like one of the biggest influences on what kind of sleeper you have.
Yeah. And I don't know that most sleep spaces talk about temperament at all. It's
no, not enough.
I've been in or seen, it's very much painting with a broad brush.
Yeah.
Every baby can sleep through the night, and by that mean not talk to you at night. And you just have to do XYZ, and then it just works 100% for every baby. And that's not been what I've seen in my work.
Yeah, it's very one size fits all, very blunt, very like lacking in nuance, and the fact that babies are small humans, not robots, and they are individuals, and therefore they need, and the family is an individual, right, as a unit, as a system. And so like that in of itself is problematic, that we're not looking at individual families' needs, both like sleep wise, right? Like some babies are high sleep needs, some are low sleep needs, some are, highly sensitive to environmental things waking them up, some are not, some need a lot of activity, some don't. But also like just other pieces of family values and family systems, and like some families do really well with earlier bedtime, some families don't, right? Because they get home really late from work, and like if we can get that baby to go to bed later, they'll actually have time to play with their baby during the week. If there's working. And so like there's all these different pieces to consider, that it's not, there isn't like a uniform, this is the best schedule or anything.
Right. I totally agree. And I think that can be a little bit unpopular. People are like, I would like the silver bullet, please. And it's like, well, like you need to talk about all the nuance of your specific situation and all of your unique brains combined. And that's how it is in my work too. It's like, I can't give you that.
Yeah, you want a clean, clear, simple answer to something that is actually quite complex and quite nuanced
and multi-variant.
Yes.
Yeah. So, on average, maybe that's not the right way to start that question, but for you, when you have a family who is like, sleep is killing us, how long does it take to start to see some sort of improvement? And I ask because I see parents that are like, we've done this for 2 nights and it's not working. And I tend to feel like that's not enough time.
That is absolutely not enough time at all. I mean, it depends on what we're talking about and what we're considering improvement. Right. Like I generally speaking, don't even want people bailing on a concept after 2 nights, because on any given day, who knows what the biggest factor is impacting like whatever piece of sleep we're looking at. Right. So when we're looking at something helpful, I want like minimum 3 or 4 days. Ideally, we're looking at across a week, right? Because these are babies. They could like have eaten something that made them constipated one night, so they don't sleep well because they needed to poop, or like they could be, all of a sudden be teething, or just having an off day. Be overstimulated or it's the weekend and you're rushing around and not on your normal routine. So I tell parents this all the time. I'm like, I don't care what happens in one individual day, right? Like it can be helpful sometimes if you have a really good day, a really bad day, to pause and be like, does anything stand out from this day that we want to bring more awareness to? Right. But in general, we need like, bare minimum 3-4 days.
Awesome.
Ideally a week to really get a sense.
Yeah. And I definitely think a week is fair to see a pattern. They do that with food too. It's like, you don't look at the intake in one day. You look over the course of a week to see kind of trends of how much is this kid eating? Like, sure, you might have a day where you just don't really feel good and you don't eat very much, but one day isn't really the red flag. So at what point do you think families should seek out sleep support?
Ooh, that's a good one. And I think it really depends, right? Because I don't think families should wait till they have no capacity to do anything, right? Because I will get families like that reaching out to me and they want a responsive and attachment-based approach, and that takes time. It's not always fast. It's like, that's the whole point. But they don't really have any capacity to do anything different, because different takes energy, right? Yeah. Even if what you're doing isn't working. So I don't think waiting until you're completely burnt out is helpful, but I also don't think like, I want to make changes now because a year from now, I don't want to be bed sharing or I don't want to be nursing to sleep. Like, that's silly, because you don't even know what's going to happen, 6 months or a year from now. So we shouldn't, no fear mom here. Like, yeah, like change it when it's not working for you, but try to ideally not wait until you're so over it that like you have no capacity to be patient and present and regulated.
So when you start feeling drained and your resources are low and you have that sense of like, is this ever going to end? Like, maybe right at the very beginning of that.
Yeah.
Please call and get a consult and see if there's things you could be doing that make life a little easier.
But I think also if you're like, I don't understand what's going on with my kiddo. Like, I will get families like that. They're like, we know we want slow and gradual, but we don't understand what's going on here. Like, sleep things seem all over the place. We feel like we could be doing this better and making our lives easier, but also like having more peaceful, healthy sleep habits. And I say that like in a not like independent sleep, because it's not a healthy sleep habit. That's just a cultural belief that we like to say is a healthy sleep habit. It's kind of like, it's neither here nor there. Right?
Yeah, that's not the only way that healthy sleep looks. Yeah. If your child wants to sleep independently, awesome. Right. But if they don't, that doesn't make them a bad sleeper.
Exactly. What I mean by healthy sleep habits is like that sleep feels like a safe place, that like falling asleep is a time of connection. Sometimes families will reach out and be like, it feels kind of like chaos. It feels like things are taking longer than they should. And we just want to make sure that we are like setting up those really connected, peaceful, healthy sleep habits. And so some families will reach out that way and they just want that space to kind of shut out the noise, right? And be like, we want a source that we trust, that we don't have to sit there on Google and be like, is this aligned with how we want to parent around sleep or is it not? Because sometimes things aren't obvious, whether they are or they aren't.
Yeah. And I think that you said something there that I think is really important. It is so easy to get overwhelmed by the interwebs.
Oh my God, yes.
And if we can find a source and we can vet that source and feel secure that that person or maybe organization, depending on what we're talking about, has alignment with our values and is going to give us advice we can trust, we can really start to cut out a lot of the other noise. Just unfollow, leaving groups. Like, I'm not going to put myself in a place where everywhere I turn, somebody is telling me, you must do this thing, and it's only this thing, and it's no other way. First of all, I don't love that approach anyway, but it gets, when you're a new parent and you're already overwhelmed and you want so badly to do well by your baby, that can really tear at your confidence.
And it takes a lot of energy, like spinning your wheels. So I tell parents all the time, if it makes you anxious, if it makes you feel like a bad parent, or if it makes you constantly doubt what you're doing, you don't need to listen to it. You don't owe like anybody your time and brain space. And so unfollow it. I will help people like make a, like, let's train your Instagram algorithm. Like, I'm happy to be people's go-to source, but I think it's great when they listen. There's so many great responsive sleep coaches and holistic sleep coaches like that I know personally, right? And so I'll often give them a list of people that like I actually know.
Nice.
Especially people who like social media better than I do, because I'm on Instagram, but I don't really it's not I don't show up like other people show up. Let's put it that way. Like I do it begrudgingly and grumpily, and other people do it joyfully and much more, much better than I do. So like when people are like, I want to follow people, I'm like, all right, what do you mean? Follow me, sure. And I want you to. But I rather you check out my podcast and my blog. Like that's where I show up with more like better, or like work with me. But then I'll give them, be like, hey, follow some of these people because I know them and I trust them. Mm-hmm. Or if I don't know them personally, I've been following them professionally. I've been following them for a while. Right. And they're all going to talk about a lot of the same things from different angles. So some of them you won't like their personality. It won't gel with you, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. But that's like the beauty of having like following a bunch of responsive accounts and then going like, I really like the way this person says it. This person, something about their messaging doesn't connect with me quite as much. And then you can kind of fine tune by personality.
Yeah, I think that's such a wise approach. If it makes you feel anxious, if it makes you constantly feel like a bad parent, if it makes you second guess everything all the time, that's not helping.
Yeah, I'll do that with some of my clients around parenting stuff too. They'll be like, my toddler parents will be like, Kim, I was listening to this podcast and it was sending me in a spiral about how to handle tantrums. And like, I just want to know what you think of this person. And like, is this actually in alignment with the way I want to parent? People I've worked with for a while that like, I know them really well. And I'll be like, what are they saying? And they'll be like, I'm like, that doesn't really line up with neuroscience. So I don't think that's really what you want to be doing. Why don't you check out this person's podcast instead?
I completely agree. There's so much fear mongering out there, and in a attempt to market, there is let me push your pain points and make you feel bad. And that's not healthy. If we're here to help parents, we need to be uplifting parents. We need to be showing them, hey, you have instincts and intuition and a drive to attach to your baby. Like you have that already. You're not going to get that from me. You're not going to get that from him. You have that. And that's beautiful. What does that say right now?
And that's why I'll often be like, hey, here are some options. Does one of those like just innately feel like a better choice for you and your baby? Right. And sometimes they don't know. Right. And sometimes I'll have an opinion like, hey, this seems like a better in the overall picture.
Right.
But also like, it's okay to get it wrong. Yeah. Like when we're working together, I'm like, sometimes we're going to experiment. And part of what makes something responsive is like, we try something, we see how your baby reacts or your toddler reacts, and we adjust accordingly. Like we're not so stuck on one specific way of doing things that we can't see how something is actually happening in real time and make adjustments.
Relationship is feedback.
Yeah, exactly.
I often will say to parents, because they'll feel like they got it wrong, a certain conversation or a certain whatever. I'm like, don't worry, they'll give you another chance. It will happen again because this is how it is when you have small people. You're going to practice sleep every night, hopefully
for a long time.
You have lots of opportunity to try things and see, how does that feel to you? And that was the I don't feel proud that we tried in desperation to just get my kid to sleep and just be like, okay, well, we'll try this cry it out thing. Everybody that I've spoken to says it works. It did not. We tried it one time, one night. It was absolutely horrible for both of us. And we learned from that. I don't think that there was irreparable harm done. I repaired with my child. I apologized to him. I held him. I soothed him. And there was like a recovery period of like, no, I'm not going to just put you in your crib. And to be fair, I was not capable of just closing the door and leaving. So I was with him that whole time. But I was like, we're not going to do this. We're going to go to sleep. We're going to go to sleep. Let's go to sleep. I'm trying to soothe you in like any way other than just nursing constantly. This is a child who would just latch and just stay latched like all night. And, I was attempting to like mold these two things together, but I was very much being influenced by people that I didn't actually like and trust. And I allowed that to happen out of a lack of confidence in myself and not trusting my intuition and my own relationship with my child. I knew perfectly well this wasn't going to work. And by work, I mean, this was not going to magically change my child into somebody who slept through the night. That wasn't going to happen. That's not the person he was. And
in his case, he had like actual physical things.
Yes.
Right. In addition to maybe being like a highly sensitive temperament. And so you kind of had two layers there.
Yeah. And at this point, he was no longer failure to thrive. So thankfully that wasn't a part of it anymore. But yeah, I mean, he still was very, very tense. He's always had this, like, it's fascinating to like rub his shoulders and rub his siblings' shoulders. Like, he is a very tense body.
When I was going to say, like, at 9 months, that's still a very recent part of his story. And so, like, when I'm working with the family, I ask about the birth, I ask about the postpartum, because just because some of these things are resolved doesn't mean like the nervous system has fully processed it and let go.
I completely agree.
And in order to sleep, our nervous system has to be able to relax and downregulate into like rest and digest. And if we have a lot of tension, or we are ties and we have a baby that's mouth breathing, like if we're not able to get into the like right sort of regulation, if we're kind of staying amped up or hypervigilant, which is also something that highly sensitive babies do a lot of, then you're going to have so much trouble with sleep, staying asleep, going to sleep. And, you know, the babies with a lot of complications early on, like that's still pretty recent for them.
Right.
And it's just not all processed out. Yeah, we haven't like rebuilt that sleep is safe after sleep not feeling safe.
Right.
For like physical reasons, not because you didn't do any, like you weren't doing your job to make it feel safe, but like it was painful.
That was his world.
Right? I mean, like, and that's all he knew.
Yeah. He almost died in his birth. And then he was very uncomfortable. Like, he couldn't feel, he felt safest with me holding him. With, like, if I can hear your heartbeat and feel your skin, and I can feel your arms on my back and my butt, then I know I'm safe. And that's when he would sleep. And it makes perfect sense, right? His body reading the world and learning about this strange new place started off with oh my God, what the fuck?
Yep.
That's a hard way to start the life.
It is. And it's hard when we don't have the support systems to sort of rally around.
Oh yeah.
To take care of you in that time, right? Because it's not sustainable. As the parent, you know, as the mom, as the parent who gave birth, it's not really sustainable. And we need to have better supports to support families in those situations so that you are still able to get some consolidated sleep, right? And your baby is able to get what he needs also, right? Those are not always mutually exclusive. It's just we are really not set up to do the work of like parenting the parents, right? Of like nurturing them, especially in these really high needs situations.
So what are a few ideas that you have utilized in your practice to help families with high waking babies, for whatever reasons, get a little bit more sleep? Like, are there things that you run through your mind? You're like, okay, well, here's a couple things that would be helpful to that situation.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit depends, like, on the baby and the family, right? So these are often babies who need contact, like you were saying. And so if we can get into a safe bed sharing setup, right? Yeah. That's good. If we can shift take, as in each parent gets 4 hours of consolidated sleep while the other parent is on baby duty.
So do you notice that really helps? So you have roughly a 12-hour night.
So I would actually, I wouldn't aim for a 12-hour night because most babies don't sleep 12 hours overnight. I would aim for like 10 hours, 11 hours, depending on the age of the baby. And we protect a 4 to 5 hour stretch for each parent.
Okay.
When that's possible. Full disclosure, it is not always possible to do this. Sometimes babies do not accept it. Sometimes we can't do it from the parent side of things, but this is a strategy that can work really well. So it often involves you having to go to bed early, right? Like, so that is another thing, like going to bed early. But yeah, one parent is on
goes to bed at 8 8 and she sleeps till midnight and dad just stays up till midnight. And then
he could. It depends on if he actually has to hold baby or he can lay down safely with baby. Right?
Gotcha.
Because if you can lay down and both parents are safe and we have a baby old enough that it's safe to do some safe co-sleeping with both parents, then you could be the one getting interrupted sleep.
Gotcha. So you
right?
could, but then just get up when baby needed to.
Right. And then, but like while your partner got straight, uninterrupted sleep and then swap. Right. And so you're.
With my daughter, I don't think I've mentioned her, but I had 2 sons and then 4 years later I had my daughter. And she was a frequent waker, but she didn't have the medical complexities. Mm-hmm. So it was different. It was a different flavor. Mm-hmm. She actually had a lot more moments of happiness and peace. And for the first like 3 months, the easiest thing for our family was actually for my husband to go sleep in his office. So mm-hmm. I wasn't carrying the weight of him being woken up and not being able to work. Yeah. I was like, I'm just going to take over my bed with nothing on it. This is not really a comfortable bed for adults at this point. It's like a super, really firm bed. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be here. It's just going to be me and this teensy baby in this big old king bed. Yeah. And we're going to do what we need to do. And we're just going to flow with it. And it was much less stressful at that point, even though I was the one each night getting up with her. It was like I could trust the system that we had, that I could just do what I needed to do. And I think that this is something I wanted to bring up too. I think that because I had that peace about it, it made it so that my energy was different around her. Yes.
Which could have impacted her, but also made it less stress and struggle for you, right? Yeah. So like that is another one, right? You take over everything, right? Mm-hmm. And then I always recommend when I'm talking to families, like if one parent is doing all this nighttime parenting, that other parent needs to pick up something, household family responsibilities somewhere else, right? So he's not doing exactly. You know, sorry. Okay. I was gonna say, and that like if we're not sharing sleep parenting, which happens for various reasons, right? Mm-hmm. Then we can still have equitable like family load. Yeah. Right. And recognizing that your spouse, your partner is doing all of this nighttime parenting and then that is valuable and it is disruptive. Like and appreciating, I think can be really powerful and like making sure that you have some time to yourself. If you know, what helps you feel like you're taking good care of yourself so that you can show up and do that. Is it taking the big kids? Is it, you know, doing more of the cleaning, right? Whatever that is, family to family is really specific. Yeah. But I get families that fixate on the sleep having to be equal. And like in some families, like I said, it can be, but in other families, it's not. Like my family I did 90% of the nighttime parenting. And when they wouldn't nurse back to sleep easily, then I would hand them to my husband and make him go rock them. It wasn't because he wouldn't do it. It's because I coped better and was able to fall back asleep faster. Yes, that was exactly how I felt. I am the one that was like, no, I feed them. I like, especially very young. I'm like, this is instinctually mind up. It's mine. Like I want to be doing this part. And it would be more stressful for me to hear you struggling with her in there if I could just nurse her and then she'd go to sleep. Like this is just easier. But that said, there was a code. If I felt tired or overwhelmed or just needed a break, I'd knock on the wall and he would get up and come in, get baby and give me space. And that was very rare with my third, but with my first, that was a fairly common thing. There were nights where I was like, I'm going to break. I can't. And he would take the baby and walk the hallways with a recording of our vacuum cleaner on his phone and walk for a couple hours while I slept. And my baby would cry and he was crying in safe, loving arms. And that was the best we could do at that point. But he's always been really good at following kind of my lead in that area, to figure out like what would be most supportive for you. And it doesn't always look the same as other families. Like absolutely. That's what I was about to say. Yeah. I love the theory of like equally dividing the night,
but it stressed me out to have my baby away.
What I like to do, so I teach a newborn sleep class. And what I like to say is like, here are the options, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is some of these are not going to resonate. Some of these are not going to work for the type of sleepers that you guys are as adults. And some of them, your baby is just going to be like, huh, that's funny, guys. No. So this can also change over time, right? Like what works well for you at 2 months might not be what works well for you at 9 months when sleep is tricky, because there's always going to be tricky times with sleep in the first 2 years or so, right? Like sleep is not a linear progression to better and better sleep. It has ups and downs based on development. So I think knowing that there are options and keeping that communication open, right? And like what gets baby the best sleep, what gets each of us the best sleep, and how do we feel like we are working together as a team and supporting each other?
Yeah.
And the whole family functioning together, like those are important conversations to have and to revisit, you know, to like check in with each other so that someone's not resenting someone else because they're feeling like, you know, whatever. Like there's so many different ways that can play out that are wonderful and work for that individual family. That
and it does change, because now it's really 50-50. If a kid is up in the middle of the night, it's kind of just whoever hears them first. And we've got the 3 kids. The boys don't bother. That's a funny word, but they don't interrupt our sleep really at all unless they're like throwing up. And there's been nights where I hear it and I go help them, and there's other nights where he hears it and he goes and helps them, and we don't really think about it. It's just, these are our kids and we go help them. My daughter, so here's one question. What is the high end of ages that you work with?
I mostly do like 0 through 3-year-olds. Occasionally I'll work at the 4-year-old. It's not like, this is kind of my focus. Sometimes I'll do older siblings, like when they're part of like the main focus is say a toddler, but there's big sibs that we need to think about. But there are people who specialize in more of the like, you know, older preschool years and
so I have a 5-year-old who wakes up at 1:30 every single night, and she can't get back to sleep. She wasn't. So I can tell you our current responsive strategy. I was talking with her about it, and she said it's not fair because I'm the only one that's scared at night, and I'm the only one in her room alone, because my husband and I share a room, and my sons actually share a room.
No, that's valid.
That's a good point, actually. Like, that actually makes a lot of sense to me. So what she's been doing is she goes to sleep in her room, and when she wakes up at 1:30, I help her scooch over into her sleeping bag in her brother's room, and she finishes the night in there, and she's actually going back to sleep. Previously, for the past like year, she'd wake up at 1:30 and stay up for hours and hours and hours and hours. And her brothers don't even know that she's there. Like they do in the morning, but she's really quiet. She just wants to be with people. And she would even come in my room. And she had like a little pallet bed on the floor. And because she cannot sleep in our bed, and that is not a me thing, that is a her thing. She will not sleep. She's like, oh, there's people. Like it's like overstimulating for her. And she like, squiggles and moves and wants to play, and she will do that until the morning. Like she just doesn't feel tired, or the other feelings override the tired. It's a little confusing to me, to be honest, but she would sometimes lay on her little bed and she'd be here with us, but she still was just like, I'm not that tired, and she'd just stay up for the rest of the night. I'm like, that's crazy. You can't sleep 3 hours. That's not enough. 4 hours.
Oh man. Yeah, no.
And so this has been a new strategy that we came up with together that has really seemed to be doing wonders for her, which I'm really intrigued by it. I'm really glad. But it's so interesting because my boys, when they had a hard night, they'd come and do you know those foam couches that like fold out into a bed? That's what each of my kids have had. And through about age 4, they'd come in whenever they needed, and they'd just lay down and go back to sleep. And that was great. And they did that. They were in my room until usually around 1.5, and then they'd move to their bed. And then there would just be these couple years of transition where they'd sleep in their room or they'd sleep in my room and whatever. but she wouldn't sleep. I was like, well, we've got to find other things to do here. And so she just loves right now going in, and she's getting better sleep. We're getting better sleep then, because even though I could go to sleep, I could hear her awake. So I wasn't like really sleeping.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a great strategy.
For hours on it. So it's been an interesting journey with sleep. But you mentioned something earlier quite a while ago about genetics. How much of a role do genetics play in sleep? Because I was an insomniac my whole life, and I have vivid memories of being the only person awake in my house as young as 3, just awake, just counting stars, coloring, changing clothes, like just awake while everybody else was asleep.
I don't know that I have like a percentage number, but I mean, there is definitely a genetic link. There's also like a genetic link with like neurodivergence and sleep challenges. So like ADHD kiddos tend to have more sleep challenges. ADHD adults have more sleep challenges. Autistic, kiddos and adults can have more sleep challenges. I mean, like there's some genetic links. Like, so I think it's sometimes helpful to think about like, did I have challenges with sleep? Do I have challenges with sleep? But also not to get so attached to it that we think that we're like, our kiddo's doomed to be the kind of sleeper that we are, because there's also a lot of factors, that interact.
There's a lot more strategies now. I mean, the only strategy was stay in your room when I was growing up. Yeah. So I don't even know if my family knew I was awake. I don't think they did. But there was never anything tried to make it different. It's just how it was. And so, with her, we've tried lots of different things. Do you, and I'm not asking necessarily for like a specific recommendation here, because I know it depends on the family, but do you ever go through and recommend supplemental tools, whether that's like teas or lotions or anything like that, as part of your coaching?
So that's kind of a gray area, right? Like I can't prescribe to you.
Right. And so there can't be prescriptions. I know.
But I mean, like over the counter stuff is like, so like sometimes I will share what like tends to work, like what things, as in like magnesium really supports sleep. There are kid safe lotions. Some families find it helpful. You're welcome to do your own research and make your own decision about that, because supplements and things I think is kind of a gray area as far as like actively telling a family to give their child a supplement.
Yeah, I can't do that either.
I don't feel qualified to do that, but I will like share information and suggest if they have a pediatrician they trust, talk to their pediatrician. But when we've already talked about, pediatricians can be sometimes wonderful and sometimes unhelpful. So like you don't need a pediatrician's permission to put magnesium lotion on your child at bedtime. So like I'll often be like, do your own research and see what you think. But some families find it really helpful, some don't. This isn't really something you can overdose on, right? Versus like an iron supplement is something you can actually get too much of, right? But low iron can
create restless legs,
create sleep problems. And so it's a little bit of a, I don't recommend specific products. I don't say you should do this, but sometimes we'll chat about some of the nutrient deficiency.
Have you ever had, so this is something I've seen, where families did like a cry it out kind of approach early on, and it quote unquote worked. But here we are 3, 4, 5 months later, and now their kid is waking again. And
all the time.
So do they then come to you at that point, like, A, what the heck happened? And B, maybe ready to try something else, kind of not necessarily having that blind faith in this method that is purported to work for every child every time, which I disagree with personally, because it did not.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the research that's been done. I mean, there is evidence that most people are repeating sleep training multiple times. So that's not like a me observation. That is like, there's been some surveys and stuff. Like, obviously we would need more research. Most of the research on sleep training is not very high quality. So,
Well, and I know there was one, also no idea what the names are. I remember one of them though, and they had 3 groups, and the cry it out group only went to sleep 15 minutes earlier.
I mean, there's all sorts. I mean, there's so many flaws with the research. Like, it's not even funny.
Yeah.
Including that, like, they often, it's like, were they exposed to education? Not did they check if they actually did the intervention? Like, they're all also getting education and counseling. Like, there's just so many problems. It's a sort of a bigger conversation than we can probably have today. But
I wonder
let's just say it's flawed.
Sleep research. Like, I know, like, the University of Notre Dame does sleep research. James McKenna.
Mm-hmm.
I read his book about, and his sleep research was really cool because he like built a whole like bed.
I love him. He's so wonderful. He's so
I felt a lot of comfort with his research. Like, reading it, I was like, oh, this is amazing. And so it's hard because the one I'm talking about that I remember, I believe that some of the parents had like switched groups in the middle. It was like, we were supposed to be in this group, but like, we're not doing that now. And so it cut it down to a really small number of participants. I think maybe like 15 total. And so there was like 5 in each group, which is a really small number. But you'll have something like that that's shared as
proof, right?
Proof, right? And so I find it challenging the way that people speak with absolute certainty about, your baby will never sleep unless you sleep train them, and you're doing them a disservice and you don't care about them. And if you really loved them, you would just teach them how to sleep. And what they mean by that is what that doctor told me to do. Just let them cry.
Yeah. I want to highlight something you said there, but also, I have a blog post that does break down a lot of the critiques around sleep training.
Ooh, I want to add that into the
remind me to send it to you. But here's the thing: we can't teach babies to sleep because sleep is involuntary.
Yeah.
You don't actually control sleep, not your own sleep, not your baby or toddler's sleep. And I think we need to really grapple with that. Like, we cannot make somebody sleep. Sleep training does not teach your baby how to sleep. Nothing can make your baby sleep because it's not something they have voluntary control over. And it's definitely not something that you have voluntary control over.
I think that's so important to recognize.
Yeah.
And it's hard. We don't like that answer as parents.
I know.
We like control. The things that are out of our control. Honestly, like, not joking, the things that are out of our control require grief. We have to grieve and let go of and reach acceptance for.
Yes.
We cannot change. And especially if we've been inundated, maybe by friends, maybe by family, whatever, with this message that we're supposed to control this actually uncontrollable thing, we start to doubt ourselves as parents, thinking that we're failing when we're living with a whole entire person who has unique needs and a unique brain, and it was never meant for us to control.
I think one of the most important things we can do as parents of young children, or I mean, gosh, if we could do it when you're pregnant for your first, but is really accept that there is a large portion that we do not have control over. Mm-hmm. And here's what we do have control over, right? Once we know our baby, we'll kind of have a more sense of what that's going to look like.
Yeah.
And then recognize that, like, we can only control the things that we can control. We actually have more control over ourselves than our baby. How we sleep is not just about how our baby sleeps. And we need to accept sometimes the answer is lean into their needs. Sometimes the answer might be change some things up that aren't working, right? Like, sometimes the answer is hold steady, right? Like, it's a dance. And sometimes that means like re-upping support that our baby stopped needing. Like, it's not simple. And there is so much that is out of our control. And the more we can accept that, like, mindfully, like, the better we're going to be able to show up and figure out, like, what are my needs? Why am I finding this so hard? How can I meet my own needs, in different ways as well in this season of my life?
Absolutely.
That's
such a beautiful, beautiful ending, I think, for all of us to sit with and hold in our hearts. I think we could talk for probably like 6, 7, or 10 hours on this topic. But we are approaching an hour. So let's go ahead and end for today. And if you guys have other questions, you can put them in the comment sections on Facebook or YouTube. You can send me an email, sammy@sureparenting.com. You can send Kim an email. I think I have that. Do I have that?
I don't know if you have that.
I have your website. So intuitiveparentingdc.com is Kim's website. And so you can contact her on there. I have her links in these show notes, and I will put them on the podcast show notes as well, so that you can get a hold of her. You have a Facebook group, right? Or is that a page?
Facebook page.
Yep. Okay. Could people DM you on there?
And most of my stuff is probably say Instagram, probably.
Oh, okay, cool. Follow you on Instagram, intuitive_parenting_DC.
Yeah, I kind of ignore my Facebook page. It just gets the Instagram stuff on it, to be fair.
My Instagram page doesn't, or my Facebook page doesn't get a whole lot of traffic. It has followers, but like people even seeing what I post, it just doesn't show up so much because of the algorithm, I guess. Yeah. So I also am on Instagram and probably will get notified of those messages a little easier. Just know that you're welcome to do this, but I'm going to speak for you for just a second. You're not going to be able to coach via Messenger. The family concept is way too complex. Like, to really dive in, you need to be doing individualized work with a back and forth and questions. And, you know, there's a process. It's not like solvable on one Instagram message.
Yeah.
Right.
I have pretty clear boundaries the way folks work with me, just because it's so complex.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that I hope that families can understand that level of focus and dedication on your unique family is why Kim's able to benefit you and help you so well. So I think that's amazing. Gosh, I'm just so glad that you were here with us today. This has been a wonderful conversation with so many pieces of information that I think are incredibly valuable. I'm going to get that blog from you and also include that. And yeah, is there anything else you want to share with us before you go?
Oh, just thank you so much for having me. You know, I think that the more we can have realistic expectations and lean into connection, you know, for sleep, just the better off we're all going to be.
Yeah, I agree. It makes our hearts feel better too.
Mm-hmm. It does. It really does.
Thank you so much, Kim.
Thank you.